In ancient times, this was quintessential for people living, particularly in the Greek Roman, and I believe also in the Atlantean, and I'm sure in the Mu or Lemuria worlds, that people believed in the fact that sound was at the core of creation. So to find your note, you found the core of your creation. And therefore our voices were, before technology took over, before the machines took over, our voices were always seen to be equalizers or harmonizers within our multidimensional, holistic consciousness.
75%, that's the percentage of people affected by the fear of public speaking. And today I'm absolutely delighted to have on my channel a really renowned voice coach who's been working in this field for over 40 years. He's been working with celebrities and members of the royal family, empowering them to find their voice and to overcome this fear. Welcome, Stewart Pearce. Absolutely delighted to have you on the podcast today.
Pleasure to be here, darling. You're such a sweetheart. It's a pleasure to be
Oh,
here.
and you too. Stuart and I were just chatting beforehand, and I shared with him that I was guided to start this podcast about 18 months ago. And initially I had a lot of insecurity coming up, which I've slowly overcome through practice of actually doing this. But obviously having a leading voice coach on, it brought up a bit of insecurity for me, which I'm sure is quite common for people. So I just thought I'd air that in the podcast and allow Stewart to speak to it, because I'm sure it will be healing for all of you as well.
And of course, as you know, I'm not just a voice coach. That certainly took up, as a result of voicelessness as a child, by the way, I discovered that I had a voice. And it was largely to do with the fact that very significant people in my early life, meaning in my childhood, said, there's something about your voice. And whenever they spoke, because I have always had the ability to see the multidimensional universe, their energy field just flared, their aura flared, and they looked full of joy. Whereas I'm profoundly dyslexic and synesthetic, so I have this crossover of senses, which meant that I couldn't read and I couldn't do math or arithmetic at school. So I was always being beaten, because I was born just after the Second War finished. And my teachers just loathed me. And what I would see in their field, so I knew when they were coming to beat me up, that they would contract and their field would go dark, dark purple. Not beautiful purple, but dark purple, almost
Gosh.
black. And it was all to do with the contusion of their anger. Anyway, so the extraordinary thing about that multidimensional was that I always used it in my voice, in my work as a voice coach, which wasn't just working with celebrities. I was working with everybody. But I've been very fortunate in my career. I've worked with some extraordinary people, starting with I'm the man who gave Thatcher her voice, Margaret Thatcher in 1981, and then all the way through to my 2 years with Diana. But I've worked with many, many people, who are going through the issue that you were talking about, which is that more of us are more frightened of public speaking than we are of dying or termination of a major relationship, buying property. Oh, and on the Pacific coastline, it's shark attack.
It's interesting. I feel that often what is underneath that fear is not feeling good enough, So
Always,
how do you
always.
work with that with your clients to make them feel enough? Because, that was a big part of actually this journey that I started, was like not to be perfect about it, just to do it, knowing that it wasn't going to be highly polished, particularly in the beginning, but it is authentic because I'm just putting out, what's coming through. So do you have any kind of guidelines in that way?
Well, our authenticity is, of course, our keystone, isn't it? It's our lodestone or our lodestar. But I'm also a great believer in, if we're going to achieve something, let's sign it with the autograph of excellence so that we try our best, but not to the point of perfection where we become anally retentive, that we still stay pulsing and breathing our humanity, our authenticity. And therefore we always have authority, we always have a degree of sovereignty about ourselves. So for somebody who comes who's really, really, really frightened, nervous, ill at ease, contused, contracted, tense, etc., etc., I always firstly find a way for them to identify what the holding point is. I don't talk about blocks, I talk about holding point. Because when I was a child, people were always saying, you're blocked, you're blocked, you're blocked. And it just seems so irremediable. And all conditions can be altered. All conditions are temporary, even though they seem so huge. And so we identify what the holding point is, which is often to do with an experience that happened in childhood. And I use my psyche, obviously, to help an individual who can't quite burrow in to the excavation and investigate what went on. And then I use alchemy, you see, because nothing is singular, everything is plural. So where there is the pain, there is always the joy. Where there is the pain body, there is always the bliss body. Where there is the ego body, there's always the soul body. The difficulty is that we stay in this area through suffering, through a belief in separation, through a belief in the neuroses of separation. So what I do is everything that I teach is really all about the glory of diversity. That if we can see these two basic premises, then it opens up to the multifaceted or the multidimensional nature of who we are.
I
So
love what you're
we
saying
turn
there.
to those insights.
I love what you're saying there, Stewart. And often these kind of holding patterns, as you call them, can be multidimensional, particularly as light workers. They often come from past life persecution. That's something I've certainly had to work through to find my voice. And often, those that if I have the most fear around speaking often have the most to say. Ultimately, they have actually the most powerful voices, because there's something, I love that you shared earlier about your own traumas in your childhood, because there's this expression, people teach what they have to learn, and it's often through those journeys of overcoming that we really step into and lean into, because we want to explore it so much deeper. So I'm loving that you're bringing in this multidimensional aspect, because there is such a strong relationship between what you're doing in channeling, for example.
Well,
And
I mean, I am a channel. 12 angels work through me.
yes,
So I define who the angels are. I identify who the angels are. And of course, I particularly work with angels like Gabriel, the divine messenger, because Gabriel can help us with our voices. And the interesting thing about Gabriel, of course, is angels, by the way, have always shown themselves to me as orbs of light. So even as a baby, even as a child, I can remember saying to my mother, who was just extraordinary, unconditional love, acceptance, acceptance. It was the patriarchy that was difficult for me. Anyway, the women in my life have always been, generally speaking, really wonderful, which is why my whole life is in dedication to the arousal of the divine feminine. But my mother would say, well, darling, I don't know really what you're talking about. So I said, but they're angels, these orbs. And she said, well, I can't see them. So we would go into church and she would say, but darling, they're angels, pointing to a stained glass window, a human being with wings. And I would say, no, they're not angels. She would, shh. No, they're orbs of light. So Gabriel comes as this beautiful blue orb, which is almost a reflection, a mirroring of the throat chakra, which of course, as we know, is blue. And for me, working with the throat chakra is one of the basic chakra that I work. But all that I do is completely holistic, physical, emotional,
so
mental,
do
and
you
spiritual.
see in this opening up our voice, opening up our potentiality, we are becoming instruments? And if we take that a step further, we're becoming instruments of the divine, because we're becoming much more clear channels that connects us to all that is.
Yes, 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 underlined several times in red with several exclamation marks. The joy of what I offer in the world is to tune people into their note, that we each have a signature note. We each have a signature tone, which is right in the center of our torso, physicality, right in the heart. That the heart is the seat of the soul. Rumi says, if words arise from the heart, they enter the heart. If words arise from the tongue alone, they don't pass beyond the ears.
You can
The
really feel
difficulty
that when you
difficulty
talk in
is
the
that we've all been
cerebral.
educated to live up here through doing, 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 doing. We've all been conditioned and educated and socialized into doing, 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 doing. And if we're not doing what we could be doing, they say so, all of that stuff. So we blame ourselves, or we guilt ourselves, or we shame ourselves because of what they have said. And often, if you're unusual, as I was, you don't fit into norm.
Yes,
So I was educationally subnormal as far as they were concerned. No, I was seeing spirit.
absolutely. And what is normal anyway? And I'm so pleased that you brought up this journey into the heart, because this is the journey. This is New Earth podcast, and this is the journey into the new earth, is the journey back into the heart, out of the head and into the heart. And sound is such a powerful means to be able to do that. I'd like to share another of my personal journeys. When I was in my 20s, my fiance um, drowned. He was caught in a rip and drowned. And I was looking for so many different ways to heal, and nothing was reaching me. And then I started doing a sound healing training, and it was able to open up that grief so that I could release it. So I do believe that sound can reach places that nothing else can.
Well, sound and light, do you see?
Yes,
Because light is the strongest, purest force that we have. Our quantum physicists say there's another energy called tachyonic energy, but I believe that that's thus far not fully investigated, because tachyonic energy is very much clustered around a black hole, and we haven't been able to measure a black hole, because if you go into a black hole, you move into formlessness. So light downloads into color, downloads into sound, downloads into matter. So I work with that corridor of light into sound, because my synesthesia is that I see sound.
amazing,
So I hear it,
amazing.
but I see it. And as a
Yes,
child, I was bombarded by light. So to begin with, I didn't know how to orchestrate it or manage it.
yes,
Children wouldn't, would they? Now I can articulate what happened, because around the age of 8, I thought, I've got to stop this. I've got to stop this, or something like it. The anger, the frustration was huge, of always being bullied, of always being pummeled. I mean, at school, my mother made sure that we were really well earthed in the world by sending us to state schools. And I couldn't understand why the kids were running around beating one another up. So I didn't want to play with them. I was very alone. I'd much rather be with the teachers or the assistants and hearing adult conversation. I found that so much more interesting. However, it all became too much, and I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm just going to shut up. So I self-muted for 2 years, and my
wow.
brother, who's a year older, was my code breaker. And we still today have this psychic connection. So I would just look at him, and he would say, "What Stuart's saying is." So he would always reveal. He was always accurate. He's very uncanny.
How
Um,
beautiful that you had that deep connection.
yeah, for those 10 years until puberty came, and then something else happened. um, and you see, being silent, you get still, and through the stillness, all of the multidimensional became even stronger and stronger. So I was able to, what I call today, organize the capacity of it. So it didn't overwhelm. I allowed it to flow within me and over me, and then I would close down and then open up. So I learned switching off and switching on. And I got really heavy, I mean, really grounded, really earthed. And thus far, I can remember up to that point. So this was 8, 9, so 8.5, 9.5, something like that. I was always, I was so airborne. No wonder I irritated people.
What an incredible journey. Thank you so much for sharing
Oh,
that.
and then I remember when I came out of soundlessness, I was humming and singing. And my mother said, "Darling, we should put you into a choir.
Oh, how
Let's put you at
beautiful.
David." So we went to a church choir.
Yes.
Of course, I couldn't read, so I would stand there and I would just copy the other boys. But I loved music, and we were also learning how to play piano. I seem to remember that time as well. And then suddenly, that seeing the sound, seeing the melody, I could, because I saw it as light, I would literally surf on the light that I was seeing. And then suddenly, the notes would drop into the words, and I began to read singing before I could read speaking,
How
because it was all
incredible.
about flow. And then I realized much later, the way that I was taught to read was the cat sat on the mat. And there is nothing about me that's staccato. Everything is legato. Everything is about flow. So, as you said earlier, all of these experiences were really teachings, our soul revealing how we could balance all of these energies. And it's not been easy, not been easy at all. But I have a strong will. So I just keep reminding the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And that's the energy, the willfulness of me that has allowed me to create and to create a world-class reputation in a situation that has been very challenging. In other words, I'm a bull, I'm a tourist boy. I just keep going. I just keep going. I just keep going because I believe that what I'm serving is the divine.
Yes,
What's more important is not my discomfort, but actually harmonizing with the divine. And the divine
absolutely.
has always led me, you see. Spirit guides have always led me. My master has been Saint Germain or Thoth for the last 50 years, so I listen. So I spend a lot of time in stillness, meditating and listening.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And you mentioned earlier that you'd had your channeled open heart and strong boundaries, and from the journey that you've shared, it must have been very important to develop strong boundaries. But what we can all tend to do within that is shut down our hearts, and certainly I can recognize that in my own journey, times in my life where I literally didn't let the world in. So how we can maintain those boundaries with an open heart is a real learning. Is that something you can talk about?
Yes, and I mean, look at Diana, Princess Diana, who I had the fortune to work with for the last 2 years. And it was a confidential relationship. I've only spoken about it latterly over the last few years because during hashtag Me Too, I was encouraged by one or two, well, actually three of my actresses in Hollywood, who were needing to step forward and say what had happened to them in the sense of being trivialized and diminished by some of the male casting directors, and on one occasion actually raped. So I said, you must step forward. How do we do it? And I said, okay, well, you can do it on screen, so we can do it in life, because I'm dealing with leading actors. So they said, well, you worked with Diana, why don't you write a book? And I heard Diana laugh because we were always laughing. Sometimes we would laugh so much we'd actually forget what we were laughing about. You know how we did as children, because the laughter just takes over and is so amazing. What were you laughing about? And that would be funny in itself. So I heard her laugh. So she was with me. She wrote the book. And one of the key containers, which is why I mention it, is that she needed to learn boundaries. She was boundaryless and therefore being hurt, being pillaged, being bruised, being assaulted, and obviously a lot of it was primary pollution that she allowed into her being, and as you were saying, it contracted her, which is why she would move from public persona to spending the whole night weeping and
Yes,
terrible insomnia.
yes,
And of course, as we know, her bulimia. I was working with her during the last 2 years, so she'd already got a handle on the bulimia, but there were still trace elements that we worked on. She came to me because she wanted to find her note, do you see? Because she knew that she could be a much better public speaker. She always felt terrified, literally terrified. So she spent the whole night, aggressing herself for the speech that she was about to give, even though she knew that we were on the outside, just looking at her in wonder and awe at her wonderful beauty and her heart and compassion, that smile. She was so extraordinary, one of the most amazing human beings I've ever worked with. So boundaries, absolutely. So, please, everybody read
oh
Diana,
yes,
the Voice of
absolutely.
Change. which is a distillation of all of the work that we did with a lot of observations about what happened, why did she go in the way that she went. And there's a whole esoteric or mystical aspect to her passing, as we know, in terms of how she affected or how her death affected millions,
It was
billions of people
profound,
around.
wasn't it?
But have actually, for example, where she decided to go in Roman times was the Temple of Diana,
really.
the Pont de Almar, which means the Bridge of Souls.
That's
So it's always
I never
been
knew that.
renowned as a
Incredible.
portal. So she chose a portal to pass through.
And do you feel that people were connected into that? That was why it had such a profound effect, or do you feel it was just from her being?
Oh, that force that moved through the world.
Yes.
Well, there you see, there is this preternatural force, this supernatural force that we experience. And on this occasion, it was Shakti. Because I can remember as a child when JFK was assassinated, the same thing happened. And then when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, the same thing happened in moderate degrees. And then also with Robert Kennedy, not the present, obviously, but his father. There is a force, an archetypal force that is released in the world, this feminine energy, the Shakti energy. And that's what happened when Diana passed through. I'm always moved to tears when I think about her. However, so it was a force of Shakti that hit all of
Yes.
our hearts for a great healing. One of the interesting things about bringing the book out is that it was immensely successful in the United States and not so successful here. And that whenever I was asked to speak about it, whether it was on TV or radio or in public, because it came out before COVID, people were much more interested in telling me what they felt about Diana rather than hearing what I had to say. I always found it very,
Interesting.
very funny. And people I noticed, and it's still today, because after all, the anniversary of her passing was on August the 31st, and we're just recording at the beginning of September. So I did a big 3-day vigil for her from October the 31st into September the 2nd. Excuse me. And people are still caught in the trauma. They haven't passed on. And Diana is saying, could you get people to stop weeping? Let's open up the joy. Let's open up the joy. And I
Absolutely.
feel that we're still living the shock of when the information of her passing hit us. People breathed in and they haven't breathed out yet. They just sucked in the trauma.
You mentioned earlier that one of the reasons that Diana came to you was to find her signature note. And I've been working through your wonderful, there's a 3-part masterclass on Stewart's website, which I'm going to put a link to in the description, that I've been working with. And it really supports you to find your signature note and to drop into your heart. How do you work with people? Because I know you speak about the elevator, starting in the head and then coming down into the heart.
Mm, mm. Well, to live in our hearts, we're really talking about becoming embodied, aren't we? Because if we live up here, we live on the outside of our beings, within the cerebral, because this loves to control. The ego loves to manipulate, coerce, and control. But as soon as we come into the heart and we come into feeling, we realize that actually we're in the holistic nature of the way that we feel our bodies and the way that we feel our feelings or our emotions. The angels teach me that feelings are very high vibration and emotions are very much to do with the lower vibrations, emotion, energy, and motion. And we tend to get stuck in our emotions. So the energies of the angels are always teaching me, the 12 angels of Atlantis, are always teaching me about feeling. And I've had many preternatural or supernatural experiences with ultra-terrestrial beings that the angels have led me to, who have said the same thing, like the Hathors, for example, who said, to cut a long story short, no, 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 we want you to understand that we were once in flesh. We were not humanoid, but we were once in flesh millennia ago. And now we're light beings. And our lowest feeling state is something you call ecstasy.
Oh, wow.
So the higher we go vibrationally in terms of the dimensions of consciousness within the cosmos, the feeling states get higher and higher. However, so finding our note, I bring people back into their body, and one of the easiest ways to do this is to use the key and the door, or the door and the key to having a great voice, which is breathing. And most of us are completely unaware of our breath, even though it's our soul. The very first thing that we achieve as we shoot out of our mother's birth canals, you can remember with your children, the great roar of life. And the last thing that we do is we breathe out and then we pass. And there are many mystical experiences about that breathing out. For example, I remember many years ago when I was researching the sacred purpose of the human voice, I was invited to go to Tibet and chant with the Kyoto monks. And one morning at 5 o'clock, there we were. There were about 10 of us chanting. And there was this gentleman sitting next to me who I was told was actually 110, this Tibetan monk, Buddhist monk, who was just amazing, completely toothless, but his smile was one of the most iridescent smiles.
Oh, how
He
gorgeous.
always, he always made me feel as though there was love in the space where we were. And one morning we were chanting, and the whole of his energy field shifted next to me. And I watched him, and I saw his soul leave his body on the breath and the chant. And he died, but he stayed completely sitting upright. So, and Shakespeare actually has a line in King Lear where Lear sees the soul of Cordelia leave her body, his dearest daughter. So the breath is the key. So we work on the breath, and most of us feel that we just need to breathe deep. And actually, there are two parts to the mechanism of breath, which is wide and deep. So when we breathe wide, we open up our ribs. We widen our ribs, not here, but in the base of the rib cage. And then, of course, the diaphragm lowers, so that it shifts the contents of our stomach, so the abdominal wall comes out. So when you're breathing wide and deep, you're sitting in the middle of your being, which increases being embodied. And then if we allow the sound to come from there, we move into the emotional resonance of our being. So we use the instructional sound of being up here a lot because that's the environment in which we're living in. But if we go into deep feelings, which is where actors have to go a lot, because the great core of what acting is all about is the truth of feeling statement. If we go here, we can feel the emotional resonance of the integrity of what is being said. Come live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove. Come live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove. They mean something completely
Completely
different.
different. Yes.
So this is very cerebral and this is very emotional. Now, our note, our signature note or signature tone is right in our hearts. So if we can just work on muscularizing and expanding the breath and then sitting in the breath, almost as though the breath was a boat on the wave or the river of our breath, that's where our sound is. So we reach the center. And in ancient times, this was quintessential for people living, particularly in the Greek Roman, and I believe also in the Atlantean, and I'm sure in the Mu or Lemuria worlds, that people believed in the fact that sound was at the core of creation. So to find your note, you found the core of your creation. And therefore our voices were, before technology took over, before the machines took over, our voices were always seen to be equalizers or harmonizers within our multidimensional holistic consciousness.
And becoming the instrument ultimately, I guess. When we really open up our voice, we are the channel, we are the instrument.
We are the divine light of the divine. We are the all that is. We are the I am presence. Our note is our sovereignty. It's really our I am presence. And so we have a way, of course, then of feeling how our field, our energy field, our auric field is a boundary. And that whatever comes in, and people can be violent, and cruel, the keyboard warriors. There are people who want my life, who want to kill me. When I published Diana, the assaults were huge. My team and I had to get police involved
Okay.
to protect where I'm living here in London. In the States, it was completely different, but people wanted to kill me for writing a book about Diana, and the book is about love. It begins with love and it ends with love. So there is a level of violence in our world, as we know. We can see
It
it.
feels to me when you're speaking into that there was something healing, because we part of the journey that we're stepping through is how can we move out of polarization and into love, out of judgment, so actually feeling, when you're speaking about your book, the resonance, and when you speak about Diana, is that of love. So it's very interesting, isn't it, that was activated.
Yes, I mean she for me was a crystallization or an exemplar of all of the virtues that we're now trying to embrace and utilize in our lives. As we move into fifth dimensionality, we're moving into unity consciousness, where the empathic union of our beings and the compassionate is the forefront of our consciousness rather than the 3D egoic
Yes,
separation and me using a torrent of words and my voice to diminish you. I mean, it's just absurd. But we're
it
still
really
seeing
is.
it going on.
It really
You
is,
know,
but that's the healing. I feel that's the journey. That's the journey that we're working
this
through
is the
as a
journey. We're
collective.
detoxifying. Yes, I mean,
Yes,
3 o'clock this morning, the angels came through, woke me up, and gave me this whole transmission that I'm going to be recording tomorrow. They have other things to say in the moment, of course, where I just sit and look into camera and they transmit. And it's all about the fact that the darkness that we're seeing, the suffering that we're seeing, is actually a detoxification.
yes.
That's why it's so dark. And what the antidote to the toxicity is are our hearts.
The balance point, and ultimately, I think the realization that we can look at the atrocities of the world and in what's going on, and see it as being out there, but it's that sense of facing our own shadows as well and
Well, that
working
is merely a
through.
mirror image of
It
what we
really
are.
is. It
This
really is.
thing, this screen for our consciousness, it's not happening to us, it's responding to us. It's just
Absolutely.
that what we're talking about is that the unconscious is now becoming conscious, yes. So, I mean, the Ho'oponopono teaches us this, the right of forgiveness, that if we can see that whatever we have in front of us, and it can be, what's the most scary thing that I've experienced? I nearly lost my life one night on the subway in New York City, where a young man had a knife at my throat. He was enraged by something that apparently I had done that I was completely unaware of. And I saw the whole of my life go in front of my eyes as he pinned this knife into my throat, which obviously is a rather important center for me, energy center for me. And I
Absolutely.
realized that this was an opportunity to dig deep into my being. And I simply said to him, I am so sorry. I don't want your pity. And I went deeper and said, I am so sorry. And he dropped me and he wandered off. And I realized in that moment, wow, although I was terrified, literally, and the whole of my body was responding to hyperadrenalized terror, that
Yeah.
actually nobody had honored his anger. So it taught me a lot about that level of violent pollution, which isn't uncommon to me actually, because as a child I was always being bullied. Um, and then as a young man, I was always being bullied. These aren't my teeth, they were all kicked out. So I've always seen the violence. And I'm an activator, I'm an instrument of activation. So I don't look for it, but I know I know the dark one when they're standing in front of me.
Yes. Yes.
So we have a choice, how are we going to respond? And we are the initiators of this extraordinary new level of consciousness, or this new vibrational field of consciousness, I should say.
It's coming through us. So, and sound has such a powerful
Yeah,
way
if
of
we can sit in
transmitting.
our hearts, if we really feel the harmony in our hearts as we sound, whether it's chanting or speaking, and that means we have to reframe old habits that have become normal. Our natural way is to sit in our hearts. I mean, Shakespeare is full of quotes about being in one's heart.
I'd love to hear some more about your journey of sound with the Angels of Atlantis, because you spoke earlier about how during the Atlantic times that Atlantis times that um, sound was such an important part of the journey there.
Yeah, they teach me that they were living a 12 helix DNA. So the level of sensitivity within the approximation of what we know as 3D, which is a very dense force of weight, space, and time, was on occasion compromising. And also the biosphere of the planet was going through very, very unique evolutionary impulses. And so there were lots of quakes and lots of geomantic rearrangements through seismic activity and very unusual solar winds. So they teach me that during the certain section of the life of Atlantis, which possibly existed from about 350,000 BC through to about 10,000, 11 or 12,000 BC, that in the middle, for about 1,000 years, for a millennia, that the pre-scientists were able to create a dome which stabilized the energies of earth, water, air, and fire, or carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen, the building blocks of creation. Physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, they all correspond as the same thing. And that they use light and sound as harmonic frequencies. So when the angels came to me, they came through harmonics. The story was that I was asked by a friend of mine who'd opened a crystal shop in Glastonbury in '87 if I would go down and read, because I was always good at giving spot readings for people. And it was this harmonic convergence. I didn't know what it was. I know now, of course. And the harmonic convergence was this extraordinary festival, this unique astrological configuration of a grand trine, where in the Mayan philosophy, the belief was that 144,000 rainbow light warriors were woken. And I guess I was one. Anyway, so there I was in the store giving half-hour readings, and I felt exhausted by lunchtime because of the heightened nature of the energy. And by that time, of course, I'd received teachings about meditate, re-nourish the whole of your being. So I drank water and I meditated. And I thought, I'll go and meditate on the Tor, of course, St. Michael's Mount, because Archangel Michael has been with me all my life. So I went to sit with Michael, surrounded by thousands of other people. And after about 15 or 20 minutes of really deep meditation, I suddenly heard these extraordinary sounds. And I thought somebody must be playing an instrument or something. I opened my eyes, and before me in the air were 12 huge orbs, different colors.
Okay.
And I heard the voice that I always heard as a child, that I know was Michael, saying, "We are the angels of Atlantis, and we bring you a temple of sound healing that you will call the alchemy of voice." And it goes like this. And this transmission
Wow.
came through me. I thought I was having a heart attack. It was the energy moved on a diagonal all the way through my heart, and my heart burst open. So I had acute palpitations. So I sat down and I grounded myself and I breathed, and the energies suddenly slowed down. So the whole of my life was changed in that moment, the whole of my life. It probably took something like 12 heightened minutes, but my recovery went on for more, for more than that, for about 20 minutes. And I knew that the whole of life had to change. So I was in a long-term relationship then. I told my partner, and I was told that I was mad, that didn't know what I was talking about. So I realized, oh gosh, that's going to have to change as well. It took about 2 years to create divorce. Um, I laugh about it now, but it was all rather difficult at the time.
Yes.
So as a lovesick teenager, I wanted to teach the angels, and they said, by this time, I'd identified their voices. Michael said, "You will not. We're going to prepare you." And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" "When the student is ready, the masters will come." So I started awakening to areas of the world that were crucial to me in terms of my past lives. Egypt, of course, I'd visited. I've been traveling as a pilgrim through Egypt for 50 years, so I knew I needed to go there. And suddenly, out of the mists, as it were, one morning, a Sufi wisdom keeper walked towards me. I was in the desert, just outside Luxor on the western bank, over the other side of the Valley of the Kings. And he taught me for 3 years. And then I was in New Mexico teaching, and this Native American elder walked in front of me and said, "I will work with you." So when you see these giants, these wisdom keepers, I don't say, "No, you're not." I just go
Absolutely.
with it. So they prepared me to hold the angels in my field. Do you see? So I needed to depollute, detoxify all sorts of programs from earlier in life to do with codependency, to do with I'm not enough, to do with terrible insecurity, etc., all of that stuff that we know well about. And then to refurbish my energy so that I could be purer for the angels. And I mean, I'm still working on my shadow. We all have one.
It's an
With
ongoing
terrible
journey, isn't
ego. What
it?
does it say in A Course in Miracles? The ego is suspicious at least and vicious at worst, it says in the Course in Miracles. So they worked on me for some considerable amount of time. I've been talking about years, and I continued my voice coaching career and gradually began to leak information through. And what was fortunate about my career around 97, when Diana died, is that Shakespeare's Globe Theatre opened. And the artistic director was my client, Mark Rylance, and he said, "Darling, I want you to come and be my master of voice." So that was extraordinary because we were in a chamber where the 7 people that were sort of core management, we all knew one another through spirit. We were all sensitive to spirit. So we were able to create using the magic of the wooden O. We were able to create extraordinary work and really allow the plays of Shakespeare to breathe in the way that they had 400 years, 450 years prior to that experience. That was extraordinary. And then Mark resigned, and a dark force stepped in. And he took one, as an artistic director, and he took one look at me and decided he didn't like me and made my life miserable for 3 years. And terrible things happened. And so I realized, well, there's no point in me being here. And that's when the angel said, "Come out of the mystical closet, open your wings and fly." That was
Yay.
15 years ago.
What an incredible journey. And is there anything else that you'd like to share about the Angels of Atlantis before we finish up today? I'm sure there's so much. I know that you've been speaking about the cosmic reset. I don't know if you wish to touch upon that.
Yes, well, I mean, the easiest thing is for people to go to my YouTube channel, which at the moment is still called Stewart Pearce Master of Voice, because that's how most people know me. The Master of Voice title was the title they gave me at the Globe. Um, because I record once a week in each month. So there are 4 recordings from the angels. And they've asked me to begin a 7-part series, which is about a cosmic reset that we're all going to experience on planet Earth. And they say it's going to possibly be in Scorpio of this year, so between October 20th through to November 20th. Is that right? Yes, that's right, isn't it, for Scorpio? And what's going to happen is that there will be a flash on our planet, and it will penetrate our ionosphere, which will probably destabilize satellite and cellular communications. And there may be 3 days of outage. And this is going to be the first of a series of resets where we will actually see all of our infrastructures change. So these videos, these transmissions, I should say, are actually definitions of what's going to happen at this point of time, because everything changes, of course. We're part of an infinitely unfolding creative possibility. So, what I'm talking about could be reinterpreted by cosmology, particularly by the cosmic guardians of the star nations, namely Sirius, Orion, Andromeda, and the Pleiades. They're channeling huge amounts of information through the angels. And the videos are very practical as well. I'm starting to prepare, okay, so if we can't get money out of the bank, what do we do? It's going to be very practical. Or if we can't get to a grocery store, what do we do? If we don't have no electricity, what do we do? If we have no cellular communications, what do we do? So it's a very practical series. But the most important thing is that the angels want to transmit or channel all's going to be well.
I was
That
going
we're
to
going
touch on
to
that because we don't want people going into fear with what you're
So
saying.
the core experience, well, you can see I'm not talking about it fearfully.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The core experience is that part of this shift of consciousness, this reset, is the fact that we're going to be given cosmic technology that will allow us to be stabilized. We're going to be given a cocoon that we will be stabilized in. In other words, there's going to be a crystalline vessel created within our energy field, within our auric sheath, that will actually cocoon us. And within, we will be living lives of complete awareness, of complete observation of what's taking place. But we will be stabilized by the harmonics of the angelic chorus, by continuous angelic messages, and of course by our own spirit guardians, whether they be dear departed ones from the family or ascended masters and mistresses, whomever they may be. All of this intelligence is with us, so there is no need for fear. And if we do get fearful, it's merely a physiological response to anxious stimuli. What we need to do is feel the fear and do it anyway. So this is a time of preparation.
Wow, what a journey we're on as a collective at this time. I feel very blessed to be here, although it has its challenges. It's an incredible incredible time to be alive. And it's been an absolute honor, Stewart, having you on the podcast. It's been totally enthralling, and I've really, really loved connecting with you. It's been
It's a
absolutely
pleasure.
beautiful.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.
And if I may mention, if people want to find out where I'm based online, they could go to www.theangelsofatlantis.com. Or if we're interested in the Magnetic Voice Academy, because most of the leading people that I've worked with to help them find their voices, who are now doing great things in the world as thought leaders, they've said, what you're doing is teaching how to be magnetic. And so it's called the Magnetic Voice Academy. It can be found through www.stewartpearce.com.
And I'll put all the links in the description for you, Stewart, as well, to make it easy for people to find. So thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening today as well.
Yes, much love to everybody who's tuning in.
And do subscribe so that you can receive some more New Earth podcasts. Bye for now.